Well, I am so happy to see you guys here today. Welcome. I know that you're going to be very blessed by this presentation. I'm very excited that Pastor Jim Brackett is here and his lovely wife, Neva. Neva usually does the cooking class part of the demonstration, so she will be doing that after Jim does his talk. And I just want to let you know that I have their cookbook, the 7 Secrets cookbook that is over here. I've had it for a long time now, and I can tell you that the tofu walnut balls are amazing. They are one of my very favorite things. And I also love their potato carrot swirl soup, which is very beautiful and very tasty. My boys just gobble that stuff up. They love it so much. And you will not even get to have that today, but you're going to have more amazing things. And I'm excited because there's things I have never tried before and things that aren't in the cookbook that are in your booklet. So with that, I just want to thank them, the Bracketts, for being here. And they live in Rice, Washington. It's a very tiny town, I think northwest of Spokane. So that's where they are, and I think Jim will tell you a little bit more about that. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Joni. Can you hear this? I'm not used to wearing a face mask, and you're not used to wearing a mask, but we're getting there quickly, aren't we? Did anybody hear Governor Inslee at 11 o'clock? I didn't. I was supposed to tune into that. I got a phone call that lasted an hour and didn't get to hear it. Probably we couldn't do this starting tomorrow. I don't know what he'll say, but the world's number one killer, I should say that in the United States, the number one killer is heart disease. We actually have, if you can imagine this, 7 747s full of people die every day from coronary artery disease. I wish you were more impressed about that. Is that a lot? Unbelievable. And you know what? It is 100% preventable. Dr. John McDougall, the Surgeon General, many, many other authorities say that and know that. Isn't that amazing? If a 747 crashed today somewhere in the world, would that be a big deal? It's an amazing story. But today I'm going to talk to you about the number 2 killer in this country. In fact, if you take all cancers, you come very close to the same death rate every day in comparison to heart disease. So it's kind of a conundrum, and what can I do about it? Every scientist is aware of the fact, every scientist in this field is aware of the fact that every day in your body, probably a dozen or more times, some cell somewhere becomes a cancer cell. I think all of you know that cancer starts in a cell somewhere in our body. Once that cell becomes a cancer cell, it's inclined to divide and copy itself, you know that, and of course eventually make a tumor. 99.99999% of the time, what we see on the screen happens to that cancer cell. There's the cancer cell, and here is what we call a killer T cell. It's one of the many different kinds of white blood cells. And we have actually understood this process for, at least 30 years. I remember first seeing photographs like this. This is an actual photograph, this is not a drawing. Clear back 31 or 2 years ago. The killer T cell is able to make a hole in the cancer cell, allowing the chemicals that are inside the cancer cell to flow out, and the cell dies. This happens many times a day in every one of us in this room. Unfortunately, once in a great while, I won't have you raise your hands, but I suppose if I asked you if you've ever been diagnosed with serious cancer. Now, a little bit of adenocarcinoma on the surface of the skin, even though we all understand it's a big deal in terms of getting it taken care of. People very, very seldom ever die from that. You know that melanoma is a serious issue that's much more rare. But if I asked you to raise your hands, probably at least a third of you in this room would say, yes, I've had a bout with cancer. And fortunately today we have some success. I'll talk to you more about that in a few minutes. But it's not an easy picture, as you all know. We'll look at those details in a minute. This is a drawing now of how this happens. So this killer T cell makes these little little black spheres and fills them with a certain kind of protein, makes the protein so that little vesicle has plenty of them. And scientists, it's interesting, they have to name everything, of course. And they name this little protein in there, one of those dots. Can you see at the back of the room that there's little dots in that thing? Can you? Okay. They name those little dots perforin after the word perforate, which I'll show you why they do that. So this killer T cell comes and fastens itself to the cancer cell or other kinds of cells that need to be killed. It's not just cancer cells. And it's important that they fasten on here. I'll show you why in a minute. And when they leave, can you see the dotted line there? What does that dotted line represent? Holes that the killer T cell drilled in the cancer cell. Y'all with me? Now listen, folks, I'm extremely comfortable with you stopping me anytime and asking a question to clarify something. If it's a question for another topic, I might say, let's wait a minute, let's wait a little bit before I deal with it. So let me show you a closer up drawing of this so you can get a better idea of how that works. That part right there I'm going to show you now on the screen. So over here on the left, I'll tell you what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to take 1 second. I should have done this before we talked. I'm going to make my pointer big enough so that you can see where I'm pointing and I don't have to stand in front of the screen to do it. And I'm going to go to accessibility and then display and make my pointer big. There we go. I thought I was going to do it. What happened to the... There we go. It didn't slide where I wanted it to. Isn't that interesting? Oh no, that's not the one I want. I want cursor. There we go. All right. See the big pointer now? Okay. So let's go back to this picture. And what I showed you on the previous slide, and I drew this ellipse, if you will, right there, is going to pretty much fill the screen right there. Y'all with me on that? Everybody? And so this is where the cell is fastened. This is where the killer T cell is fastened to the cancer cell on one side and then on the other. Y'all clear in what I'm showing you? Then, once that's fastened and leak-proof, then these vesicles come moving over, and then when they touch, this is inside now the killer T cell, when that vesicle wall touches the wall of the killer T cell, they suddenly go together, kind of like soap bubbles, and now the vesicle is open and pours out its stuff into the space. Are y'all with me on that? So now those little proteins that the killer T cell made and put in that ball, I call it a vesicle, actually insert themselves one by one into the wall of the cancer cell. You see where I'm pointing? That's one of those little balls that when it's inserted looks like a stick. And if you can imagine several people up here standing with me, and let's just say we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder, but for some reason when we connect like that, it bends a little bit, and it bends a little bit, and it bends a little bit. This group of people, what is it? What finally happens when we get enough people? It's a circle, which is exactly what happens because those little proteins are made so that when they're side by side, the connection bends a little. Got it? And I wish you'd all talk to me. You can talk through your mask and say yes. And if it isn't clear, what are you supposed to do? Raise your hand and say, please, I didn't quite get that. Please, folks, I'm so comfortable with people. I can't stand it if I think somebody isn't understanding. Are you all with me on that? I'm an old math teacher, science, electronics, whatever. Okay. So what actually happens then is this assembling group of proteins becomes what? It becomes a circle, which makes what in the wall of the cell? A hole. This is how your killer T cells, every day, probably in 24 places in your body, kill a cancer cell. It's amazing. Aren't you glad for that? The problem is, once in a while, they get missed. I am a cancer survivor. I was told 21 years ago I had 5 years to live. And I'll try to get to that story if we have time. All right. So the reason that the killer T cell has to fasten here and here, why do you suppose that's the case? Somebody want to guess? Raise your hand and talk to me. Why do you suppose it has to fasten there? What if it didn't fasten and those perforins leaked all over the place? What would they start doing? Killing all kinds of cells. You all with me? So it has to fasten itself, like I mentioned earlier. Another interesting story here that we'll see in the next slide is that there is another kind of protein that is made inside the killer T cell, also in little balls. They don't show that. What's the name of that protein? What do you suppose that word came from? To protect. What happens is, if the perforin comes back and gets into the wall of the killer T cell, to keep it from making a hole and killing itself, are you all with me on that? The little protectin interrupts that bending. Got it? How many didn't get it? Let me see. How many should have raised their hand and didn't? All right. Can you ask me a question that would help clarify it? The perforins, when they hook together, make circles. When the protectin gets in the midst of the perforins, the circle doesn't complete itself. So no hole is drilled. You all with me on that? So the killer T cell protects itself and carries on then to look for the next cancer cell. However, everybody in this room has lots of killer T cells. Why have some of you gotten cancer? Or somebody you know, somebody you love and maybe is no longer here because of it, right? The answer is, and we don't really know probably full answers. You know how this is. Scientists spend their lives learning what they didn't know before. But what's going on is there are various kinds of mechanisms that suppress immunity to cancer. Now, we say immunity to cancer. That cell in me somewhere became a cancer cell. You all with that? But because the killer T cells kill it, you could say I'm immune to cancer, right? But we didn't know this even 15, hardly 10 years ago. The mechanisms that we have discovered that get in the way of this process. I'd love to take more time, but this just discusses And if any of you are professionals, I'll give you a link to listen to a detailed lecture on this topic. But the normal process here is indicated. The killer T cell does its job. Sometimes there can be a barrier. Just obesity, just overweight can restrict circulation in such a way that the killer T cells couldn't get there. Since I just said that, would you like to guess what the number one risk factor for cancer is now known to be? Anybody want to guess? Based on my statement about a half a sentence ago? Overweight. We've only known this for a year or so. The number one risk factor, folks, for cancer is overweight. We don't know all the reasons, but probably one of them is an anatomical barrier. Circulation is restricted by extra weight. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of that? You may haven't thought of that. Many of you are familiar with the writings of a woman that's been gone for over 100 years who said in one of her documents, perfect circulation is required for perfect health. We didn't have the science then when she said that. Today we see that so clearly, folks, it's incredible. Anything I do to restrict the circulation, like inactivity, did you know that the blood pressure on the I think you'll all know about this, at least the words I'm using. The blood pressure on the arterial side of the capillaries, which then form a vein. Are you all with me on that? Everybody? You're not nodding your heads. I'm watching you folks. I'm sorry, it happens automatically. I taught for many years. I know what everybody in the room is doing without even thinking about it. So I'm watching you to see if you're getting it, and it would be helpful if you told me that, see? If you don't tell me that, I think I haven't done it very well. Forgive me for that, that's just an old teacher. You all know, I think, that there are these things that are called capillaries, and when a little tiny artery, we have a different name for it when it gets that tiny, but it's still an artery, suddenly blossoms into 20, 30, 40, 50 capillaries. And all these capillaries come back together to form it's a tinier vein, there's a different name, it doesn't matter, it's still a vein. So that every drop of blood, folks, that gets to the heart after the heart sent it away has passed through some capillaries. Are you all with me on that? No exception to that. There's a tiny exception in the kidneys I won't get into right now. And here's the problem. Because of Americans' high-fat diet, red blood cells clump together. I actually have the video of this. There was a physician in Oregon, the state of Oregon, up in Oregon Health Sciences University, that photographed red blood cells traveling from a tiny vein through the capillaries and back out, from a tiny artery through the capillaries to a tiny vein. And when the creature, this happens for any creature, when the creature gets a lot of fat in their diet, the red blood cells, which are normally electrically charged negative, repel each other. You all know that like charges repel, is that correct? So all these red blood cells on purpose are electrically charged so they stay apart from each other. When the electrical charge disappears, they start sticking together. And when they stick together, because a red blood cell actually has to fold in half in order to get through the tiny capillary. How many of you were aware of that idea? Let me see your hands. 1, 2, wow. You all know it now. You all with me on this? As soon as those red blood cells start sticking together, they just cannot get through the capillaries. And most Americans, and many of you, have a lot of your capillaries blocked most of the time. And that's not good news, but I'll tell you what to do about it. And if you're interested, you can. But this is the kind of thing, folks, that's causing some of this problem. And so many other problems. Circulation is just such an amazing key to everything. So the blood pressure on the arterial side, let's say it's 100. You measure your blood pressure, it might be 120/65 or something, right? Let's just say it's 100. What do you think the blood pressure would be like after the capillaries come together in the vein? More, less, the same? Shall we just take a vote? Let's not do a scientific study. Let's just take a vote. Tell me what you think. How many think it would be the same? Let me see your hands. Come on, you guys. How many think it would be less? How many think it would be more? The rest of you don't know. It's way less. It's 1/10 of the pressure, which means if you're talking about, let's say, blood down in the lower part of your leg or in your feet, there isn't enough blood pressure to get the blood more than about that far off the bottom of the ground. Are you all with me? So how does the blood then get back to the heart? Is that why people hang upside down on a rack? Most of you have never done that. Is that correct? So how does it get back? All of the veins in your body, there is absolutely no exception to this. They all have little one-way valves. So whenever you move a muscle, even at night when you think you didn't move all night long, do you know how many times the science has found that the average person moves at night when they're sleeping? 70 times. Of course, you're prone usually when you sleep. So the blood pressure, when it's not working much against gravity, can travel much better. But the point is this: unless you use your muscles, the blood cannot get back to the heart when you're sitting or standing. Y'all with me on that? Every time you take a step, 2 ounces of blood squirts out of your leg into your abdomen. Every step. It's amazing. Because the muscles squeeze the veins. Are you picturing with me how the blood can only go one direction if there's little one-way valves? Every so far all along the vein there's a little one-way valve. And activity, I don't use the E word. What's the E word? People are scared of the E word because they tend to think that you have to go out and huff and puff. You don't have to, folks. You certainly are welcome to. But you can have perfect health in terms of your activity, even if you walk slow. Everybody's supposed to walk fast. That's not correct. It's fine. But even a slow step, folks, pumps 2 ounces of blood. Are you all with me on that? See? And we need to be active. Probably most of us in this room probably need to be more active than we are. Was there a hand over here I didn't see? I saw people pointing somewhere. Okay. All right. There's other issues that I'm not even going to get into. Inhibition, suppression, things that we have learned that keep the killer T cells from doing their job. And almost every one of these functions that we have studied, it turns out if I will eat right and be active, it makes these things work better, so the killer T cells can do their job. Are y'all with me so far? Okay, some of that wasn't in the notes. That was free, no charge for that. Here's some more. We call them accelerators or brakes. It's a metaphor on various systems that we have found in the killer T cells doing their job. It's fascinating, folks, how complex God has made us and how so many of these things are affected by the way I treat my body. But unless you're a professional and want to see that lecture that's in a lot of detail, and even that, not as much detail as you might want. So what can I do? What are prevention-related lifestyle issues? I already told you that overweight is now the highest risk factor for becoming a cancer patient. I hope that's a motivation if you're struggling with that, and we'll give you some ideas. Activity. Activity itself, because of circulation, is a great issue in terms of preventing cancer. Everybody knows about smoking. I won't even take time to discuss it. Colonoscopies. I'd love to have you raise your hand. Please don't do it. If you've never had one, you know the rules. If there's no colon cancer in your family, when you raise your hand and I point to you, it means I'm going to come back in a second. If you have no colon cancer in close relatives, then it's okay to wait till you're 50 years old before you have your first colonoscopy. You know the rules, I think. And if you have some colon cancer, in my case, both my father and my mother were diagnosed with colon cancer in their lifetime. So I started getting colonoscopies when I was 40 years old, which is what the rule is, 40 to 45. But boy, when both my parents, I'm going to start sooner. And every time the gastroenterologist looks in my colon, and I want to look with him so I don't let them give me very much anesthetic, and I watch the screen while they're doing it. I even have a video of it, which I will not show you. And you probably all are aware of the fact that these things called polyps, which they draw, making them look like a little toadstool, they do not very often look like a toadstool, but nevertheless. That polyp can just be a little barely a hump somewhere in there. Anyway, when the gastroenterologist sees that, he has a little loop of wire that he can stick in there and lasso that thing and turn on the electricity and cauterize while he cuts it off. Most of you are aware of that, correct? And then that's pulled out and put in a jar and labeled, and later on, a day or two, a pathologist looks at all of those. I always have lots of polyps. It's because, folks, I have a genetic weakness for cancer of the colon. You all with me on this? Neva, my dear wife, I've been badgering her for 30, 40 years to get a colonoscopy. Maybe 30 is correct. And she finally went and got one, and there were no polyps. So what do you suppose the doctor said to her? She was 50, she was 60, I'm sorry, she was 69 years old before I badgered her enough to get it done. What do you suppose the doctor said? Don't bother coming back. You're not making polyps. You all with me on that?
Question was answered. We were looking for people that had lights on.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. So, colonoscopies, folks, they're not fun. You got to take that stuff that cleans you out, and you can't eat for 24 hours or more because of it. But yeah, I'm telling you, folks, you can prevent 90% of colon cancer. There was a time about 45 years ago when the number one killer in this country for black people was colon cancer, black men. The number two killer for white men was colon cancer. And that has stopped largely because of colonoscopies. So please don't hesitate any longer, as unpleasant as you may feel it might be. They put you to sleep. You don't even know what happens, so why not, right? I'd love to talk more about colonoscopies, but I think I'll leave it there. A whole plant-based regimen, especially soy. Now, everybody knows that soy is bad for you, correct? That's incorrect. And I probably should apologize to you if you came to our lifestyle program, our 6-day lifestyle program, which is very much like Weimar. How many of you have ever heard of Weimar Institute? Let me see your hands. Okay, how many have not? Maybe 3 or 4 or 5. Weimar has been taking guests for 40 years and putting them through a program to teach them how to do the best thing they can for their bodies. And for the 2.5 weeks that you're there, that you do that. That's why you've paid $6,500 to go there. And I don't know quite how to make this clear, but the physicians and the other health practitioners who have worked at Weimar through the years, almost all of them are friends of mine. I was the administrator there a few years ago when Dr. Nedley first came. Some of you know that name. He asked me to come and be the administrator for a couple of years because he had a practice to close in Oklahoma and could not be there. Prior to that, I've been a guest lecturer with their physicians for 15 years. All of these men and women are highly trained in what you might call lifestyle medicine. Today, we actually have a residency in lifestyle medicine developed by an Adventist physician. So any physician who wants to take the time can become well trained in this. And what I want to tell you is, I was saying a moment ago, I probably should apologize to you because there's probably quite a few sacred cows in here. Now, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about an idea you have. You understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? All right. There's probably a lot of sacred cows in here that if we had enough time together, you would find that these sacred cows should be put to rest. Are you all with me? And one of those is that soy is bad for you. Every one of my friends in this field would agree with what I'm telling you today. Soy is actually really good for you. I'll try to come back to that and at least give you one example of why that has gotten foisted upon the public. But soy is a very helpful food. I try to get people not to believe that there's any miracle food. Any plant that you eat is just fine if you're not allergic to it. But soy, it turns out, as I'll show you, I'll read you some stuff from a research paper that will help illustrate that. We now know, and this has only been published recently, we now know that even one drink of alcohol, now there's probably hardly an alcohol user in this group, I understand that, so I'm not going to dwell on this very long, but you know people, maybe kids. I'm sorry to say that both of my children have become users of alcohol in spite of the fact that they know this. It's a heartbreak for me. I cry over them almost every day when I think about it. Even one drink of alcohol, folks, increases the risk for cancer. And every single drink after that increases the risk for cancer. You think it's a really great thing that most of us in this room were taught many, many years ago that we shouldn't use alcohol? Is that a great plan? For lots of reasons. Because hardly any of you, if any at all, are users, I'll not press that any further. Diabetes, irrespective of whether you're overweight, is a serious risk factor for cancer. And while I'm there, you know, the problem is, folks, the material that I would like to present to you would take me about 24 hours. If you came to our lifestyle program, which is a 6-day program, I do 3 lectures every day, about an hour and 15 minutes each. And it takes 3 lectures a day for 6 days for me to get through all this material. So, unfortunately, we don't have anything like that kind of time. But I was going to say to you, I have a couple of lectures on dementia. Is there anybody in this room that's concerned about not getting dementia someday? Would you please all raise your hands? You know what the number one risk factor for dementia is? Diabetes. Diabetes is a huge problem in this country. I think you know that. Most of you look like you don't have diabetes because you're pretty close to normal weight, which is just wonderful. But it's helpful to know that. And by the way, the connection is so secure in terms of the research. They're actually calling Alzheimer's disease today. It's not yet a designated term in the medical literature, but everybody sees that this is the issue, and many physicians are already using this term. We're now calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. You all know about type 1 and type 2. That just shows you how close the connection is between diabetes and the risk for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Late menarche, breastfeeding first child before 30 or so are all clearly shown to be decreasing the risk for the occurrence of cancer. And let me give you a little primer on that, even though I'll come to it in a minute. Forgive me for erasing this lovely verse here. And in the female breast, actually men have these structures as well, are these a group of 10 to 15, we call them lobules, which make mother's milk, and all of them come together in one little tube we call a duct, as you know, to take the milk to the baby. And lining that duct is a layer of cells, so this layer I'm trying to draw is actually a tube. Are y'all with me? You know what I'm trying to draw? And it turns out that at every menstrual cycle, just before the cycle, every one of those cells dies. We have a name for that process. And before they die, they copy themselves and make another tube. Got it? Now let me give you a little background on the fact that in every cell of our bodies, we talked about this very briefly, I ran out of time yesterday, there is this ladder. What do we call this ladder? Somebody said it, most of you are with me, that's the DNA. I think I said yesterday, I don't know if I got that far, but let me say it today. I think I already said it, I can't remember, today. I told somebody else, I'm sorry. There is no exception to this. All cancer, please note this is a lecture on cancer. There is no exception. All cancer is caused by mutations, usually a series of mutations in the DNA. Are you all with me on this? What does a mutation mean? I'll try to make it as simple as possible. These rungs come in four different styles. And if this is supposed to be an A rung, and if for some reason it got replaced by a C rung, I'll put a C out here instead of the A, we call that a mutation. Y'all with me? In a few minutes we'll look at the causes of mutation. Everybody in this room knows that radiation causes mutation. You know that, right? That's kind of an incorrect statement because the word radiation from a physicist can mean all kinds of different things. But you kind of know what I'm talking about. X-radiation would be a better term. So here's the problem. Here's a cell, one of these little cells, that's going to copy itself so this one can die, and so the new one can become part of the new tube. Did that make sense, what I just described? Here's the problem. There is about 1,000 mistakes in each cell that's copied. As the mechanism that's building this cell over here is copying that ladder, mistakes are made in some of the rungs. Are you all with me on that? Now there's 3 billion rungs in that ladder, and 1,000 mistakes isn't too bad. But does it make sense to you that those 1,000 mistakes could eventually contribute to cancer because of the mutations? And in fact, listen to this. This is astonishing. 84% of breast cancer occurs in that tube. Ductal carcinoma. And we're just virtually certain it's because of copy error. Are you all with me on this? Now, yesterday I was intending to spend a lot more time and never quite got to it, but I think I just mentioned it. How many were here yesterday when I spoke? Like 90% of you. And I think I have a picture on this set of slides. But our body makes proteins among the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different proteins that our body makes. One class of them are called tumor suppressor genes. Remember that? Did I not mention that yesterday? Okay. Am I forgetting what I said, or were you asleep when I talked? I can't remember which. So now I'm going to tell you. A tumor suppressor gene, all genes code for a certain protein. Any one gene codes for a certain protein. Your body uses the gene. When it manufactures that protein, it has to have the gene, because the gene is like the pattern, if you will. You got that? So the tumor suppressor protein codes for a protein, y'all with me, that travels along the new DNA and fixes the mistakes. Got it? And fortunately, or unfortunately, fortunately, they do a really good job. Unfortunately, they do miss one once in a while. So there is still some copy error that ends up in the tube. Y'all with me on that? Okay. And we think that's the result, that's what's behind all this high percentage of the cancers being like that. So late menarche. Let me draw one more quick picture. And by the way, I'll show you a slide on this if I manage to get to it before my time is up, which is coming rapidly, I think. High protein diets cause early menarche. The men may not. Menarche defines the age at which a young girl starts menstrual cycles. High protein diets cause early menarche. In this country, about 100 years ago, the average age of menarche was 16 years. It has been decreasing slowly over time until today it's about 11 years of age. And of course there's a curve. So there are people, the girls that start earlier and some girls start later. Are you all with me? So this is 11 years. Got it? And in rural China, 100 years ago, menarche was occurring closer to 20 years of age. So the way Americans live has over time been slowly decreasing the age of menarche. I was aware of this. I will try to get to the slide that looks at it more carefully, but when our first child was born, a little girl, by that time Neva and I were using only plants, unrefined. We were both vegetarians when we married, but before long we had become users of plants only. And when you use only plants, you virtually never get too much protein. When you use animal products, you always get too much protein. You all with me on this? And now you understand, folks, I'm not trying to tell you today what you have to do. I would like you to become perhaps more well-informed than you were before you came here about what the issues are. Y'all with me? And I'll promise you this one thing. I'm not teaching you some crazy stuff that I believe in comparison to other people. What I'm sharing with you is what the Weimar physicians and scientists have been sharing for 40 years. Are y'all with me on this? Now, my wife says to people, believe you because you sound like you know what you're talking about. You understand, she believes I know what I'm talking about. But I'm reminding you of that for this reason. There's a lot of stuff out there, folks, that you can listen to on TV or even read where people sound like they know what they're talking about. And what's the inclination when we hear that? To believe it. And unfortunately, a great deal of it, folks, is untrue. So you say, why should you believe me then? Well, I'm telling you that I can march any one of those Weimar physicians through this room and they would say, he's telling what we have always told. So I'm just telling you that's the authority. Besides the fact that I've been a scientist all my life and I do a lot of reading, and so I have a pretty good sense of what's going on. In any case, I thought from what my professor had taught that it might take several generations of this low-protein regimen to get this menarche later in life. But little Kathy, when she became 11 years old, didn't start cycling. She didn't start cycling till she was 16. So tell me, how many cycles did she miss instead of having started at 11 years of age? And instead she started at 16. How many cycles did she miss? Let's say it's 1 month instead of 28 days. 60 cycles, is that correct? She spared herself, listen to this folks, 60 cycles of potentially making cancer in one of her ducts. You all with me on this? It's an amazing story. And I said to myself, well, there's always outliers. Do you know what I mean by that term? There's always people that fall on either side, irrespective, correct? Her sister comes along 2 years later, and by the time she becomes along in those years, sure enough, same thing, 16 years of age. Probably because of the way we fed those girls in our home. So late menarche, all you gals know, the men probably do too, that most women, not all women, but most women when they're nursing do not cycle. We don't really know why a first child before 30 years of age, but the data is clear. So if you have a grandson or a daughter, a grandchild or a child of your own, and they're interested in children, it would be really wise for them to try to do that before they become 30 years of age. Virginity, obvious what's going on there. And monogamy, I don't think Neva would mind me saying that I'm speaking now about cervical cancer. You gals, everybody kind of knows about this today because of this big issue with giving young girls a vaccination, correct? For about 7 different kinds of viruses that cause that cancer. There's probably 100 different kinds of viruses that cause cervical cancer. But we try to pick the ones that are the most likely, right? Y'all with me in what I'm describing? And I don't think Neva would mind me saying that we were celibate till we were married, and we have been faithful to each other for 55 years. The chance of Neva getting cervical cancer is about what? 0. It is a sexually transmitted disease. You all know that, don't you? Almost never occurs in any other way except as an STD. So these are the kinds of things that we can do. Let's go on to heredity. And this is where we come to this so-called BRCA gene. I told you yesterday, if you were here, which most of you were, that the BR comes from the word breast and CA is cancer. So it was found out that this gene was somehow involved with women getting breast cancer. Y'all with me in this idea? And I mentioned yesterday, I said, have you gals ever heard this thing called the cancer gene? This is the gene I'm talking about. That's an inappropriate term for it. We all have this gene. We all got 2 copies of it. Why? Because we get a copy from mom and dad. In every cell of your body, you have this. And I think I got some pictures on this that I'll come back to in a minute. So I'll wait to finish that. Minimal use of radiation, X-ray type of radiation, even CT scans, which is X-radiation, and other kinds of therapy, other kinds of X-rays which are used for therapy. We all know we should minimize those as much as possible. We now know, this is quite recent, folks. I've always been taught by all my professors in graduate school in nutrition that we really don't need supplements, and that's largely the case. There's probably some exceptions we're learning of, and one of them is vitamin D. We just don't get enough vitamin D, especially in Western Washington. Why? Sunlight. And the sun, folks, has to be high enough so that your shadow is shorter than you are tall. So in the winter, in this part of the country, you really can't make any vitamin D in the winter. So you all probably should be supplementing. All of my physician friends say the same thing. How much? 2,000 to 4,000 units a day would probably be reasonable. And as much as possible, try to get it from the sun. But the sun has to be fairly high to make that happen. So give some thought to that if you're not there already. You would have to take an awful lot of vitamin D, folks, for it to become toxic. You can become toxic with vitamin D. But you can see a physician, if they find that you're quite low and they want to do something, they'll give you 50,000 units a day for 3 weeks, and you will not become toxic with that. You all with me on this? So taking 2,000 to 4,000 units is never going to cause a problem, but will put you in a position that we think is a pretty wise place to be. We can't study this. You can't do a double-blind study, folks, in laughter to see how it affects people's cancers, right? But we think it's probably, to have a joyful heart is probably a good idea. Stress control is also difficult to measure, maybe a little less difficult than laughter would be, but we're quite certain it's an issue that we need to learn how to have a peaceful mind. You might say a peaceful heart. Pardon me? Oh, hormone replacement therapy. Thank you for calling that out. Back in 2004, I was driving home from the office, and this hit the news that the Women's Health Initiative study, which looked at 140,000 women, I think it was 140, and had gone on for about 10 years, was showing that all these women who were taking HRT and were told that this would help reduce heart disease, you remember that story? Etc. It was turning out to be bad for the women. Overnight in America, 37% of the women that were using HRT stopped. And probably it was a good idea. So unless you're having really tough symptoms, and those symptoms from menopause can be bad enough for some women that they're just about going stark crazy, and so you might take, for a short time, some hormone replacement therapy. Caffeine. I realize that lots of people in this room don't use caffeine, which is a good idea, and those that are probably have thought about quitting. It is an addictive drug, folks, is that correct? And just in case you struggle with it, let me give you a quick little picture here. And I think you'll know this anyway, but if you didn't know it, you'll say, I get that. If this is normal brain activity on a scale, whatever the scale is, whatever units, and you take some caffeine, there is no question that brain activity becomes more intense. You can type faster, make fewer mistakes, etc., etc. Y'all with me on the idea? That's been well documented. However, every time you have the next cup, that, I'll just do it in the same place, that influence starts a little lower and doesn't go quite as high. And by the time you're well addicted to the coffee, you have to have coffee just to feel normal. Are y'all with me on that? I won't ask you to raise your hand that you know that by experience, but you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Have you ever met anybody that said, I have to have a drink of coffee just to become human? This is what's going on. Y'all with me on this, see? So I would certainly encourage you, if you are a coffee user, to consider stop using it. 85% of Americans are addicted to caffeine. And they love the research that shows that coffee is good for you. And you can find some things that coffee helps. But it's bad news. 2 cups a day double the risk for bladder cancer, for example. 2.5 times as much colon cancer, and so forth. So I think most of you would agree, even if you're coffee lovers, that it might be a wise idea. Let's go on now to most preventable after lung cancer from smoking cessation. This is colon cancer. 90% can be cured or prevented, I should say. Those are the rules. This is not good. I didn't even know this till about 5 years ago. I have 4 friends who are gastroenterologists. And I heard this one day somewhere, I can't remember where, and I called up one of them. I says, Ken, what in the world? He says, it's true, Jim. And Ken and I have worked together for, 40 years probably. He said the best clinicians miss 10 to 15% of the polyps. for various reasons that I won't take time to get into. And I have such confidence in Ken's skill, but he said, yeah, that's the case. So what does that mean? Well, if you get one every 5 years, the ones they missed last time, hopefully they'll get this time before they might become a problem. And you get counseled, you probably know this, on how often you should come based on the number of polyps, and when they examine the cells in the polyp, they can tell how fast these things might be progressing toward cancer. How many have read the book, The China Study? Can I see your hands? About 15 of you. Let me just summarize for the whole group. This map, which I'm now going to make larger, is of the country of China, and each little closed line drawing is a county. There's several hundred of them here. And the darker the color, the more cancer of that particular type. So in the China Study, there's a page like this for virtually, for many types of cancers. Not every type, to be sure. Now let me give you a summary of this. The cancer site is listed here, and what the occurrence is like in males and females in China. The reason there's a dash between the two numbers, some counties have an incidence as low as 35 per 100,000 people per year, and some counties have an incidence of 700 plus cancers discovered per 100,000 people per year. Are y'all with me on what this graph is displaying? Let me show you some interesting results of this. Here's one, and this first line is just all cancers, so I'll just pass that up for a minute. But let's take a cancer here in the liver, where in some counties it's 7, in other counties it's 248 per 100,000 people. How many times more cancer in some counties is there than others? 35 times. This is astonishing beyond belief, folks. In America, if there is a cancer cluster where it's 4 times the normal rate, the CDC will show up and make a very big deal out of that issue. You following what I'm saying? And what do we have here? That's one of the lower ones. Let me show you some of the other ratios. 60 times as much. 75 times as much. And what the China study showed, folks, was this had to do with lifestyle. And the lowest cancer is occurring out in the country where the people have to carry everything and they have to raise all their food from the dirt. In other words, they're active and they're only using plants. Why are they not using animals to eat? It's too expensive. They can't afford that. So they grow potatoes and carrots and tomatoes or whatever. It's astonishing, folks. We're talking here for a while about how to prevent this terrible situation, correct? That's the issue. Now, this is T. Colin Campbell, the author of the book. What we found was shocking. Low-protein diets inhibited the initiation of cancer by this rather powerful, powerful carcinogen, regardless of how much of this carcinogen was administered to these animals. What kind of diets prevented it? How do you get a low-protein diet? Only using plants. And Campbell was the owner of a ranch where they ate mostly animals. Are y'all with me? Until he, as a scientist, began to see this and completely changed his lifestyle. We found that not all proteins had this effect. It was actually casein in milk, which promoted what? All stages of the cancer. Now that's a whole topic in itself. How the cell becomes a cancer, and then what makes it grow and so forth. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Nobody told me when I had to stop, so I presumed I might have to stop in 1 hour. It hasn't seemed like near an hour, has it? Okay, all right. This is a very interesting thing. All stages. I'm going to deal with that in just a moment here. This is kind of it. Cancer is the result of a renegade cell which becomes abnormal in degrees by successive mutations in the DNA And watch this. Once that cell becomes a cancer cell in you and in me, which it does every day, probably a dozen or 2 dozen times. Once that happens, it will take 100 days on average, some more, some less, before that cancer cell does what? Copies itself, and it's now 2 cancer cells. Another 100 days it is 4, etc. It will take 8 years, folks, before that cancer is as big as the period at the end of a sentence. On average, some slower, some faster. Another 2 years and it's as big as an eraser on the end of a pencil. Now, it sometimes can be imaged at that period state. Not very often, but it can be at times. Mammograms, I've sat with my friend in the x-ray, where he's studying the x-rays, and you can sometimes catch a cancer. Here's the problem, folks. Even when it's the size of a period, it is almost never the case that cells have not gotten away. That's a double negative. Did you follow me? That's the really bad news. In fact, John McDougall gave a lecture, I was going to say recently, it's been several years. And the title of the lecture was The Fallacy of Early Detection. What do you suppose his proposition was? Are you tracking with me? Go ahead. Back there. Well, yes, but people who eat plants get cancer. So what is the fallacy of early detection? Want to take a shot at it? Somebody else? The horse is out of the barn, no matter how early you detect it. Are you all with me on that? That is bad news, I understand that. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer 21 years ago, as I mentioned. I decided to have surgery, even with all of its problems. And they got it all. In fact, I have memorized the pathology report. Want to hear it? I'll give you one sentence. I need to tell you this. In the days before robots were doing it, they would take the prostate out and put it in a jar of ink, maybe for 15, 20 minutes, and take it out and freeze it. Then the pathologist slices it up into maybe 50, 60 slices and looks at the whole slice, every one of them, under the microscope. Y'all with me? To see where the tumor is. So here's what the pathology report said. The adenocarcinoma closely approached the inked surgical margin. Got it so far? Comma, no transection was appreciated. They like to use big words. What he means was, the knife never cut through the tumor. No transection was appreciated or seen. Y'all with me? So what would we normally say to the patient? We got it all. No, they didn't. Long before it was diagnosed, cells are going away. Y'all with me on this? So when the doctor said to me, you have 5 years to live, he wasn't lying. The average American male, because of the way that male is living, with my diagnosis, even though they got it all, will be dead in 5 years. That's what happens to the average man. With the cancer that I had and how aggressive it was, are y'all with me on this whole idea, right? See? Why am I alive 21 years later and not even sick yet? I'll tell you something interesting. The cancer is probably growing everywhere in my body. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about this, because I think this is useful to half the population, and the other half is married to that half, so it's useful to all of you. Everybody knows about PSA. Prostate-specific antigen is only made by prostate cells. With me? So now my prostate is gone. If there's any PSA in my blood, what would that say? There are prostate cells somewhere in my body making PSA. Is that correct? What kind of cells would they be? Cancer cells. The average male who has prostate surgery where they got the whole tumor will have detectable PSA within a year. What does that mean? They're measuring it in their blood every month, and finally, it's there. We just don't have the sensitivity to detect it, and finally they detect it, right? Is that good news or bad news? That's bad news. The cancer's growing in other places, probably everywhere. You might say, well, I heard that, or maybe you know, that prostate goes to the bones. This is not terribly important to know, folks, but it's useful, I suppose, in some manner. The cancer cells go everywhere in your body. Most of them die. Probably 99% of them die or are killed by killer T cells. But once in a while, one of them finds a place where it manages to survive and start multiplying and not get killed off for whatever reason. And the most likely place for that to happen is in bone marrow. But it's not that the cancer cell goes out and says, where's some bone? Where's some bone? No, that doesn't happen. They go everywhere. Y'all with me in the circulation and so forth. Okay. So, this is describing that it takes 8 years for the tumor to be as large as a period. And during this time, the tumor almost always metastasizes. I'll come back to what I was saying a moment ago. And just for the sake of interest, I will show you, if I get a chance to with the time I have left, the research that shows that men who are on a plant-based regimen, on average, this was a group of men with matched cancers. The men that were on it wasn't the best plant-based diet. It was a macrobiotic diet. They were getting some animal products. They lived on average 19 years before they died of prostate cancer. The men that were left on the standard American diet lived 6 years before they died of prostate cancer. So every cancer that we have studied grows more slowly when you are on a whole food plant-based regimen. We don't use the V words. What are the V words? Vegan or vegetarian, because you can be a junk food vegan. Is that correct? Yeah. It's okay for you to use them, don't misunderstand me. But the proper term really in the literature today is whole plant. And what that means is the plants should be used unrefined. You all with me on that idea? And we find that that's the place where we get so much benefit. So here's how cancer happens. It's kind of a combination of a carcinogen, that's a substance that causes cancer, by changing the DNA. And, watch this, this is an amazing idea, a promoter, a substance which causes the cancer to grow. One of the amazing things, folks, about unrefined plant foods is, like I said, almost any cancer you study grows slow because most of the promotion that takes place is based on what we eat and comes from animal products. Y'all with me on that? Please? Do I need to repeat it? This idea, folks, let me give you an example. Doesn't everybody know that asbestos causes cancer? That's not true. Asbestos is a growth promoter. Mesothelioma occurred as a cancer because of exposure perhaps to coal dust or something, correct? And probably would never have grown very fast except if that person is exposed to asbestos, which is a growth promoter for many cancers. Are y'all with me on that? Same thing for smokers. You probably know that people who smoke and also use, are also sometime exposed to asbestos, there's more lung cancer. There's not more cancer. It's just that the cancer cells that were there and are not growing much suddenly are made to grow fast. Y'all with me on the idea of a growth promoter? And we see that in virtually all cancers. It takes a growth promoter to make that thing grow. So because of the way I'm living with only plant foods unrefined, my cancer, in fact, every one of my physician friends that knows me and knows about this, they all say the same thing. They say, Jim, you're not going to die from prostate cancer. And then they'll say, I don't mind dying with cancer. I just don't want to die from it. Y'all with me on that? I hope they're right. All right. So there's this initiation. The cell becomes cancerous. Something makes it grow. And progression is the word scientists like to use to say cells started leaving to make other tumors. This tragic situation we all hate so much. Here's the story. It was a macrobiotic diet. I'm going to do it quickly because I mentioned it already. Some guys, the guys that were on the macrobiotic diet, and it's not the best, it's a good one, but not as good as what we're talking about. They lived 19 years on average, and the guys who were on a no special diet lived 6 years on average. And there's if some of you are interested, I have most of the research. I have the citations if you were interested. Dr. Mervyn Harding put this on the board one day. Many of you will know that name. This guy was an MD, got a PhD in nutrition from Harvard, a PhD from pharmacology from Stanford, and he got a Doctor of Health Science degree besides. And I had the privilege of sitting at his feet during my time in graduate school on nutrition. And he put this diagram on the board. This line represents puberty, this one represents menopause, and this one represents death. And what he said was, doesn't matter what kind of protein, a high protein diet, let me put the line on there for you, causes early menarche, early menopause, and that can be helpful in some ways, and early what else? Early death. What caused this? A high protein diet. I'm sorry to say this, folks, because one of my dearest friends has been the manager of an ABC for many years. If you're not aware of this, most of you would be. ABC stands for the Adventist Book Center. 80% of their incomes comes from selling meat analogs is the proper term. You know what I'm talking about, right? I'm sorry to tell you, folks, it's junk food. It's high in fat, it's high in protein, and it's not health food. Maybe a transition food? What do most Seventh-day Adventists think about that food? Come on now, tell me. It's good for you. So I'm sorry to tell you this bad news, but it happens to be the truth. However, on a low protein diet, what do we have? Late what? Late menopause, which isn't the best thing. It can be earlier for other reasons. And what? A longer lifespan. Very interesting, folks. So here's the truth about soy. Maybe I'll close with this before I get run out of town on a rail. The elders of Okinawa have repeatedly been shown to be the healthiest and longest lived people in the world. This was demonstrated conclusively in the renowned Okinawa Centenarian Study, a 25-year study sponsored by the Japanese Ministry of Health. The researchers conducting this study analyzed the diet and health profiles of the Okinawan elders. They concluded that high soy consumption, that what? Is one of the main reasons that Okinawans are at extremely low risk for hormone-dependent cancers such as breast, prostate, ovary, and colon. Compared to North Americans, they have a staggering 80% less breast cancer. And how much less? 80% less. Breast, prostate, and less than half the ovarian cancer and colon. This enormously reduced risk arises in part, the study's authors say, from the Okinawans' large consumption of the isoflavones from soy. The lowest cancer rate in the world are found among the people who eat the most soy. Our other studies have confirmed the link between soy consumption and reduced cancer risk. Japan Public Health Center study found that the lowest breast cancer rates in women who ate the most soy. And a recent study published in The Lancet showed that women who ate the most flavonoids, mostly isoflavone from soy, had a substantially lower risk of breast cancer than those who had a lower flavonoid intake. Most tellingly, a huge study published in the Journal of National Cancer Institute, Notes 3, found that women with a high intake of soy reduced their risk of breast cancer by how much? That's pretty big, isn't it, folks? It's amazing. So why would this be when you've heard that soy is bad? There's two reasons you've heard that soy is bad. The first one is that I told you that 84% of breast cancer occurs in the duct. Listen to this. 90, that should have been 86, I think. Doesn't matter. 94% of breast cancer is what we call ER positive. Are you gals aware of the fact there's about 10 different kinds of breast cancer? How many of you gals have heard of a breast cancer called triple negative? Can I see your hands? And this is we call it a hormone-dependent cancer, which is not the best word because the reason that so much of the breast cancer is estrogen receptor positive goes like this. Let me ask you this to see how much time I need to spend. How many of you have ever heard of something called a receptor involved with the human cells? Can I see your hands? Okay, here we go then for just a minute. Our cells have little proteins that cells make and stick. Most of them hang part inside and stick out. Sometimes they're just laying on the top. And these receptors, as something comes by, if it's what they're supposed to grab, they will grab that stuff and sink down inside the cell and take that thing, whatever it was, inside. You all with me on the idea? Receptors. If all of our receptors suddenly would stop right now, we would all be dead in an instant. Amazing how we're constructed. And it's amazing to me what we don't know about ourselves. I've always said to people, could we teach this stuff to grade schoolers? I'm asking you, could we do that? If we took enough time, could we teach what I'm teaching today? I've always said that, and this is a crazy story. About 8 months ago, my granddaughter called Neva and said, one of our granddaughters, I want to come and listen to Grandpa's lectures. So she sat there for the whole week and took notes, and it blew me away. This little 7th grade girl, I'm always asking the people in our session, you understand they're with us for 6 days, the next lecture, before we go into the lecture, we have a little review, and I try to ask them questions. And I'm amazed at how we can't remember anything. Can you relate to that? So here she is in this session, and I'm asking the group, and nobody knows, and she keeps saying the proper answer. I'm thinking, what? Well, kids remember stuff, don't they? But I shouldn't say I. Neva was so amazed, she actually took pictures of Ava Lee's notes. I should take the time to show them to you, but I won't. But I realize, folks, you get older, it's hard to remember stuff, isn't it? And somehow the kids can do it easily. Where was I going with this? Oh, thank you. These cells here have estrogen receptors. Not all the breast tissue does, but many different kinds of cells have estrogen receptors. And when this cell becomes a cancer cell, if estrogen attaches to the receptor, it makes the cancer grow faster. You all with me on this? So it's an ER positive tumor. And most of you gals are familiar with this drug called tamoxifen. Tamoxifen was constructed by organic chemists to have the same shape, at least part of it to have the same shape as estrogen. And it therefore is did I tell you guys this yesterday? Proteins work because of their shape. Do you remember that little statement? So here is a receptor that is able to grab something based partly on its shape. Are y'all with me on that? Its electrical signature is also part of the picture, where the pluses and minuses are. And so tamoxifen tends to occupy rather well ER receptors. What would that do about the growth of breast cancer if it was an ER positive tumor? Slow it down. Y'all with me on that? Now it's a drug, so guess what? It's a foreign substance to the body, so guess what? There are side effects, correct? You gals know about that, probably. So here's the interesting story. Because soy has phytoestrogens, the word phyto just means plant. Soy has phytoestrogens. And somebody, without knowledge, assumed that those phytoestrogens would occupy these receptors and make the cancer do what? Grow faster. It's incorrect. It actually makes the cancer grow slower. I was talking to Dr. Tim Howe recently. How many of you know the name Neil Nedley? Like 95% or 90% of you? I don't know if you have as much respect for him as I do. I know him extremely well. I worked for him for 2 years. And I frequently call him up when I just want to double check if I'm right. And he said to me one day, we have a mutual friend, another physician named Tim Howe. He said to me one day, you know, Jim, Tim Howe is probably the top internist in this whole country. I know Tim pretty well. I've been in it. We've stayed in his home, their home. I've sat with him in his office. I am so impressed by this guy's skill and knowledge. And so once in a while I call him. A lady came to me with an issue that had to do with her breast cancer, and I gave her some counsel, but I called Tim just to kind of double check, and we talked about it for a little bit. We were about to hang up, and he said, oh, wait a minute, Jim. Make sure she drinks 3 glasses of soy milk every day. I had actually told her to do something close to that. Are y'all with me on this? A man who's considered at the top of his, can I say it, game, is doing what? Telling people to use soy. So it's crazy how these things get legs, and people tend to believe it because somebody sounds like they know what they're talking about and says it's not good for you, right? Y'all with me on that? The other reason that soy has a problem is because of GMO. About 90% of the soy produced in this country is genetically modified. I need an hour to talk to you about this. Some of you are going to want me to leave because of what I'm about to tell you. And if you want me to leave, I'll leave. I was asked about 2 years ago to do a lecture on this topic. I thought I knew the answers, but I knew what a sensitive topic this is. This is crazy, folks, how sensitive this has become. I've had people walk out of the room disgusted because of what I'm about to tell you. So I called about 6 friends. One of them was the head of the nutrition department at Andrews University for 30 years almost. We've worked together. We're good friends. We talk frequently. I called a couple of my former professors. One of them has a PhD in food science. If you want an expert on some question like that, it would be somebody with a degree in food science. You all with me on the idea? They all said the same thing. I'll cut the story short by saying the last person I called was Neil Nedley. I said, what do you think, Neil? These are his exact words. This is about the problems which might occur because some food has been genetically modified. Are y'all with me? This is what he said. These are the exact words. Jim, I don't think it's a problem. And I don't think it ever will be. Now, if you have confidence in Neil Nedley, and if any of you ever listen to Neil Nedley, will you end up after an hour with confidence in this man? And if you knew about his training, and I know this guy almost as well as if he were my brother, it's a tremendously blessed man and deeply dedicated, and God has blessed him. I hope that would help you not just dismiss his opinion and the opinion of my other 6 experts. Are y'all with me on this? People that I am fortunate to have as friends. Let me tell you why Neil would have said that, and all the others, and why I thought I knew what I was going to be talking about. I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. I don't know. It's funny when I describe something like this, I can kind of tell if I talk to people later, they didn't get it. But would you all try real hard to get it? Are you ready? When an organism is genetically modified, what happens is there is a new, I wish I had a different color, there is a new gene put in there that was not there before. Are you all with me? Genes, I asked you this yesterday. I asked you Does anybody in this room know what a gene does? I don't remember if I took the time to wait for somebody to respond, but I'm going to tell you what it does. A gene has the information for your cell to make a protein. Are you with me on that? Now, the scientists would rather use words that are not familiar to us exactly. They would say a gene codes for a specific protein. Codes for? Got it? So if you put a gene in that plant that was not there before, what will that plant do now that it didn't do before? It will make that protein. Are you all with me on that? So the plant is now making a protein that it did not make before. You're with me so far? What happens to that protein when you eat it? I'll tell you. First of all, recall that a protein can do a certain job because of its shape. When that protein gets into the hydrochloric acid, it is unfolded into just a string of amino acids. All proteins, not just the one that's new in that plant. Are you all with me? Some are watching the person coming through the door instead of listening. Are you all with me? Are you all with me? Now that string of amino acid gets in the small intestine, where it's cut up into amino acids, cut up into single amino acids, which travel in the blood and get into all the cells, so the cells can make whatever protein they're supposed to make. Did you follow that pathway? So folks, it doesn't matter what shape that protein had or where it ever came from. It's going to end up in your body as amino acids. Are y'all with me on that? That's why every single one of those people said, sure, Jim, it's not an issue. What is the average person in America, and maybe a number of you, maybe you're going to be mad at me now and walk out of here, that I'm telling you that GMO is not an issue. But most of you have been led to believe that it's a big issue. And listen, if you want to avoid GMO foods, it's okay with me. Please understand that. Here's my big issue with this kind of thing. People will make that their health program. I listened to a young gal give a lecture. I have no criticism for her. She's just terribly uninformed. About 30 minutes she was talking, and it had to be every other sentence she would say, and that's non-GMO. What do you think the people by the end of that lecture, because she perhaps sounds like she knows what she's talking about, will believe as to what the big issue is in getting better health? Non-GMO. Do you understand my problem with people having information like this? There's some other issues I'd love to take time. I'm sure they want me to quit, even though I've got about as many slides left as I've shared with you so far. I'm not here to sell anything. If you're interested, you can buy all of my lectures in one set of DVDs for $134 if somebody would like to do that, and use them to show to people and to listen to and teach kids or whatever. I can tell that I'm supposed to quit.